at least one other member. We can take action if we don't have a quorum. We can forward whatever action is taken as a communication from the committee if need be, if we don't have that third member.
I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat that?
Oh, I'm sorry. We anticipate a third member. If there's not a third member, any decisions that are made today on any of the items would go forward as a communication from the council members. I think we have, do we have any cards on the first?
They're all on item 5.
All on 5, that's what I anticipated. Mr. Parks, unless there is any questions, we would approve items 1 through 4.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so if we want to go then to item number 5, get a report from that department.
Item number 5 is Weiss Grow motion relative funding for the Wilshire Malcolm project.
Good morning, council members. I'm John Fisher, Assistant General Manager, and I'm joined here by Pauline Chan, Senior Transportation Engineer, who manages our neighborhood traffic management programs for the city. In February 2008, the council directed that DOT install temporary traffic management measures in the Westwood area on a trial basis. It was in response to a development project known as the Palazzo. The motion said that there would be a trial of 6 months, and it directed the department to evaluate the effectiveness of those measures and to determine if those measures should be made permanent or if those measures should be removed. In May 2008, the developer and the community reached an understanding that the developer would make funds available on a more immediate basis to put in the trial measures and possibly any permanent measures, and that understanding spelled out a process as to how the opinion survey would transpire. In the meantime, the department installed those devices, and in January, the department issued an opinion survey to see if those measures were deemed to be effective. The process that was spelled out in the understanding between the community and the developer indicated that to be deemed effective, there would have to be at least a 40% response from the community, and that there would have to be a 2/3 consensus among the community. In March, or rather in January, we issued the survey, and in March we received the results back. And the results indicated that there was a lot of participation from the community. There was a 70% response, but the approval rate was just shy of 60%, and 66 2/3% was required. Accordingly, because it didn't reach the level of consensus that was spelled out in the opinion survey or in the understanding, accordingly, we are recommending that those temporary measures be removed for 2 reasons. One, the process spelled out that there would have to be a 2/3 consensus, and it didn't quite make it. And 2, we recognize that there are strong opinions about retention of those devices and removing those devices. And we believe that the removal of those temporary devices would allow more constructive discussion among the community and the various factions of the community in order to reach a consensus on what other measures would be appropriate. Now, there has been much discussion about why we have a 2/3 requirement, which is a supermajority, and that's based on the best practices. After we surveyed various cities throughout the nation, they require a 2/3 approval or supermajority for measures like this. And that is because it's important that for measures of these types, where there is controversy and strong opinion regarding it, it's important that we have a stable and enduring support for these measures. If we went by a simple majority, it would be very easy for a few votes to sway the other way and then overturn that. So we want to make sure that these diversionary measures that we put in have stable and enduring support. Plus, that has been our practice when we've implemented other measures of these types throughout the city. We've required a 2/3 supermajority approval. That has been true in the Venice area, in the Royal Woods area, Sepulveda Pass, in the Silver Lake area, Encino area, and Venice area. So this would be consistent with our past practice as well. In addition, there has been much discussion about defining the area of those who would be able to express their opinion on these measures. And the area that we have determined is based on the network of local streets. Whenever you put in diversionary measures, there are some streets that benefit because now they do not have the generated traffic, but some of the adjacent streets may experience an increase when you put in those diversionary measures. So it's important that we have the expression of opinion on the effectiveness of those measures from all residents who are experiencing those impacts. And so we select our network based on all the local streets between a arterial street and a collector street. Sometimes, depending on the network, we'll go to arterial. In this case, we went from arterial to collector between Hillgard Avenue and between West Home. And what we found was that there were some streets that experienced a decrease in traffic. That was the good news. But there were some streets that experienced an increase in traffic. So we feel in order to, again, go to constructive dialogue with the community, it would be important to remove these measures, and also the process spelled out that these measures would be temporary unless a 2/3 majority was received, and it was not obtained.
Pauline, do you want to add anything? No?
Well, I just want to add a couple of points about the need to remove the measures at this point in time rather than wait. As we go along with this consensus process building, and we have met 2 times in the council office with the representatives from both sides of the issue, we know that we will have...
Since we had our last meeting, you met twice?
Yes, yes. We know that we will be asked to examine future ideas based upon the actual conditions on the street. To let these measures remain, that would tie our hands in terms of being able to define what the existing conditions are, because these measures have created a different traffic pattern. So we need to know what the existing conditions are as created by traffic from Palazzo that is now more occupied than when we first took the before data, more than a year and a half ago.
I was going to say, was the project completed in this period of time?
The project was completed after the temporary measures were put in, but the more important issue is that it was not fully occupied. So there was no opportunity to evaluate what the additional trips are within this neighborhood. And I just want to reiterate that, for example, in another project where the temporary measures did not generate the sufficient 2/3 level of support, in the case of the Silver Lake neighborhood between Glendale Boulevard and Silver Lake Boulevard, we in order to, again, engender a fair playing field for both sides, we made a commitment to, in fact, remove the restrictions within 60 days after the certification of the failed survey. And that was very necessary, and then both sides were willing to sit down and continue working with each other.
And did you have, I think I may ask this question yesterday, when I had a similar, not as big as this, but looking at what should happen in a consensus, we held a meeting where everyone came and we looked at all the different options, and you could sign up, and there were staff and there were stations and things. Did that happen in this instance? Was there ever a...
Not quite in that format. There had been 2 community meetings, but they occurred after the temporary measures were put in.
After the temporary measures?
Yes.
Okay.
So the ideal process, I will admit, that it would be to have had these community meetings prior to putting in the temporary measures, so that this would be sort of a lesson learned for us.
Because we found in this instance in Sherman Oaks that although some people felt that they should put in all of these mitigation measures when they went out to a vote, and we had 300 people actually come into the library and to sign up and find out the answers. The leadership was surprised because there was a lot that people didn't really want that they thought they did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have any questions, Department, before we take
Let me just ask, what I'm most interested in is what's happened since our committee meeting, and to what degree did we get participation from both sides, and what got hashed out, and was there any, even some partial consensus on anything?
I think the positive thing about these two meetings that we did have quite a bit of participation from both sides, and there was constructive dialogue on both sides. It was, everybody was friendly to each other. But the most important thing was that we were able to identify quite a list of potential measures that we could discuss further and evaluate. And some of them included restrictions, and some of them included the more typical traffic calming enhancements like traffic circles, speed humps, and so on. So I think that there is are willing, capable representatives in the community from both sides that can work together to come to a consensus. That's what we want to facilitate from here on.
And what would be the timing if they were taken out, the timing as far as building that consensus and moving forward to implementation? I mean, I guess a lot depends on what you're going to put in for mitigation measures or calming techniques, but what's the timeline that your office would anticipate?
I think that there are certain things that we can do fairly quickly. Stop sign patterns, and if we can get petitions for speed humps quickly, because we've already conducted a lot of advanced studies for the speed humps, so those are things that we can do quite easily. With the turn restrictions, I think, or any kind of restrictions going from here on, we would, according to our policy, would need to conduct a second survey. And so the time there would depend upon, perhaps having a community meeting, because I think that would be the wise thing to do, and then to come up with a survey package and conduct the survey. So that will take months. And then the more challenging things, but very positive measures, are things like traffic circles. We do not have enough funds in the from the Palazzo project to pursue those more costly measures, but nothing stops us from preparing a better plan for this neighborhood so that we can pursue other sources of funding, other sources of traffic calming funding to accomplish those particular objectives.
No, I was just interested. So we didn't resolve anything, but it's a lot of substance to continue the discussions. Okay. That's all.
But I think it's important to note that we need to set up an even, fair playing field because as long as these measures are in place, I think that one side will always feel that there's nothing shown to us to allow us to come to the table as equal partners for this process.
Okay. I'm sure we will have additional questions after we hear from the speakers. But, and sorry, we only have 2 seats up here, so we only call 2 people at a time. But Donna Velnick and Esther Magna.
2 minutes, Ms. Grove.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Donna Vennick. I would just like to make a brief statement stating that the city has a duty to all the residents in our neighborhood, not just a small interest group that diverts the traffic from the streets to other streets. The temporary traffic mitigation has not allowed traffic out of our neighborhood. It just allows us to use it does not allow us to use the two major streets that we've always used to get in and out of our neighborhood into Westwood Village and into UCLA. There's just been traffic diverters allowing us to go left and right on the two major streets and not directly into the village, which really needs our support and where we would like to support and be able to use. Thank you.
So you are in from the position of removing the temporary.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
My name's Esther Magna. I respectfully request that the committee vote no on the motion before you for several reasons. One, the DOT's testimony conveys that they want to create an even playing field with all members of the community, and similarly, Donna just referred to that. But that severely overlooks the contract that's in place and the reality that there is a vulnerable, affected core of residents most proximate to the development for which a condition of approval was written. It sounds nice, but the reality is there is a vulnerable core that deserves the attention, and that is demonstrated in the fact that there's a condition of approval and a neighborhood protection plan in writing that has been signed by the city for which it must be followed. The contract is in place, and it was not a hasty, voluntary, or merely an understanding, as was conveyed earlier. It was an agreement that was a result of 6 months of daily contact with city representatives, including Weiss's office, DOT, planning, and others. It's a contract by every relevant definition, and it must be followed regardless of whatever backdoor politics are going on. The second reason why I urge you to vote no is because in the contract, it specifies that there's a vulnerable core within the greater Holmby Westwood neighborhood, as I mentioned, proximate to the development. And the reason why the contract specifies thresholds for significance, it's to identify that this vulnerable area needs the attention and needs the mitigation, not the entire area, and nor should inconvenience or subjective criteria be brought into play. Even the phrasing of item number 4 in the contract, it's couched in actual data counts, all in the same sentence. Data, hard facts, not subjective whim. The language is very clear. Use standards of significance, 8%, 10%, 12%, depending on the street volume. There is no subjectivity involved with that, and the reason is to protect the vulnerable core of residents, not the entire neighborhood, not people that are bothered by UCLA traffic or other issues. The last comment I have to make is that this is a very unique case. We heard about Silver Lake, we heard about other areas, but this is unique because there's a written contract in place. There was a condition of approval that preceded it. So it must be treated with that context, that there is a contract that needs to be followed. And the contract is there to protect the residents, and doing anything less disrespects the written word.
Thank you. Jay Stein and Jackie Friedman.
Councilman Parks and Council Member Gruhl, thank you for continuing this matter. I too want to state that in my hands I have the contract that was signed by the city, by the homeowners, and by DOT and Planning and Jack Weiss's office. This is a document that needs to be upheld. If you don't uphold this document, then what are you going to uphold in this city? What reliance is there when people get together and sign a document? Everything is spelled out as to how this is going to operate. If you don't uphold this, then all the agreements that you have signed are up in the air, and this is a real problem. I, as a teacher, have contracts with my students at school, and if I am to tell them we are changing the conditions now and we are going to change the manner in which we operate, you tell me how this country and how this city operates. It's a disgrace if this is what's going to happen. I urge you to vote no on this motion. Additionally, you can't have it both ways with the levels of significance. All right, it was spelled out in this document what they meant. DOT is now saying that, no, that's not really what we mean, and we have the capability of bringing in subjectivity. You can't have it both ways. At community meetings, they mentioned what the levels of significance were in outright numbers, and now they're saying there's subjectivity to it. No, it is spelled out here. It's spelled out in your documents that you have adopted in the TIMP what those levels of significance mean. Councilmember Gruhl, I'm Lori Dinkin's daughter. All right, and I am not going to let this go by where you don't recognize a signed document. You as controller are going to be looking at documents in your new position, and I urge you to look at this document and uphold it.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning, council members. My name is Jay Stein. I'm a Malcolm Avenue resident. I'm also a board member of the Holmby Westwood Property Owners Association. I urge you today to vote no on this motion for four basic reasons. One is that the motion itself contains material misstatements of fact and or mischaracterizations. Second, that the motion has the effect of violating the conditions of approval of the Palazzo Westwood project, particularly condition number 19, and the and this city council's approval of that project on those conditions. Third, that the motion violates the terms of the Neighborhood Protection Plan contract that was entered into by the city, the developer, and the residents. And fourth, the Neighborhood Protection Plan contract measures passed, and they are effective. So briefly, as to the first one, that the motion itself contains material misstatements of fact or mischaracterizations, the motion portends that the current traffic mitigation measures are somehow tied to the Wilshire Malcolm project. They are not. Luckily, today we're finally hearing from the DOT representatives acknowledging that these measures were installed pursuant to the conditions of approval and the contract, Neighborhood Protection Plan contract associated with Palazzo. Secondly, that the motion violates the conditions of approval for the Palazzo project. That's because condition number 19 required exactly this kind of Neighborhood Protection Plan contract. Thirdly, that the Neighborhood Protection Plan contract spells it all out, and that if this committee approves of the motion, it will be endorsing this city's violation and breach of that contract. That contract defines specifically what the affected area is, and I encourage you by voting no to uphold what that says and the standards for surveying those affected area residents only based upon objective, not subjective criteria. Thank you for your no vote.
Thank you. Marnie Bodek, Royanne Stern. Is it Royanne? Roxanne, sorry. Okay, I think it's Roxanne, sorry. It looks like Royanne, but that's all right. Mine's not so good either, so.
I would like you to clarify something. In the absence of a quorum, what will happen?
It goes to the council as a communication from this committee.
But a decision will be made today from the committee?
The intent is the decision will be made, and Mr. Rosendahl will be coming back.
Okay.
He's going between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rosendahl has two committees today.
I saw that he wore two hats. I saw
Yeah.
that.
Marnie.
Hi, my name is Marnie Bodak, and I'm a Malcolm Avenue resident, and I was a former board member of the Homeowners Association. I ask that you approve funding for the removal of the temporary traffic mitigations. These traffic mitigations were developed by a committee that represents only a very small area of the Holmby Westwood neighborhood. It definitely does not represent the support of the majority of the neighborhood. This small group was trying to solve a traffic problem in their own corner of the neighborhood. They did not take the whole neighborhood into account, and they did not address the impact of the temporary traffic mitigations on the rest of the neighborhood. These individuals are biased, have their own self-interest at heart, and have repeatedly refused to work with anyone else to solve the problems, including individuals on their own street. The temporary traffic mitigations discourage neighbors from accessing and exiting the north end of Westwood Village. They have increased traffic on Malcolm, Manning, and West Home Avenues and have created dangerous speeding problems on these streets. They've diverted traffic away from major traffic arteries into Westwood Village. Furthermore, they've funneled traffic in and out of the neighborhood onto Manning Avenue, which is not a major artery and is too small to handle the increased volume of traffic. Despite a neighborhood petition to remove the traffic mitigations, a survey which affirmed the affected neighborhood's desire to halt the mitigations, and recommendations by the city's own Department of Transportation that these mitigations are not working in the best interest of the impacted homeowners, this small committee persists. It is an absolute waste of city time and money to continue this effort that is not representative of the neighborhood and does not serve the entire neighborhood. We need a broad-based process that serves the entire neighborhood, not just a select few in a small corner. Thank you.
Roxanne Stern. Well, here we are again. It's been over a year, and we're still saddled with the mitigations that were set up in the Homeby Westwood area. And why are we here? Because literally just a few disgruntled homeowners made decisions and agreements with the city and DOT in 2007-8 without any input from the residents of the community. When the survey was tallied that was taken in after the mitigation was put up, the measure did not pass. That's it, just did not pass. And since then, the funding from the city to remove the impediments has been thwarted. So I'm here to ask you to fix that. All we want is what has rightfully belonged to our communities, remove the mitigations. DOT is in favor of removal. The 5th District Office is in favor of the removal. All the residents of the adjacent neighborhoods who I have contacted are absolutely in favor of removal, and I have signatures and emails of all the people, which I can leave with you, who are not in Homeby Westwood, but are in the adjacent area, compared to because people in Westwood Hills have no children go to Warner, so they are affected. It isn't just the people who live in that neighborhood. It's a very big deal. Please make this right. It doesn't make any sense to leave up the obstacles. There's not one legitimate reason to keep them up. Safety is not an issue. Traffic reduction is not an issue because the reduction in one area has just spilled over into another area. The issue is all of us are being held captive by several residents who put their personal desires above the community. Please provide the funding for the dismantle of the barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa Foster, Mark Magna. Is Mark here? If Mark, maybe he'll come back. Marilyn, start. Oh, Mark, I'm sorry.
I'm Lisa Foster. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm short. I'm Lisa Foster. I'm a resident of Manning Avenue, and I'm here just to talk about my experience and how the process regarding these mitigations felt to me and to many others who were not involved in them from the beginning. The way it seemed to me was one day I came home from work and the mitigations were up. There were signs saying they were temporary and that some survey would be taken in 6 months. I soon noticed that traffic on my street was increasing significantly, whereas before, backing out of my driveway in the morning, I rarely encountered cars. Now I get 1, 2, sometimes 3 cars every single morning, and it's not a street that can really handle that kind of traffic, as other people have pointed out. As months dragged on with these temporary mitigations, I began to wonder who's responsible for this, because they appear so mysteriously. And I found that our HOA board had not officially discussed them or sanctioned them. The measures were put in at the request of 3 people, all of whom do serve on the HOA board, but were acting as individuals. Councilman Weiss's office had been led to believe that they spoke for our neighborhood. But in this matter, they were just individuals, and the mitigations are a result of a deal between these three residents who represented themselves, and Councilman Weiss's office representing the city, and Kasdan representing his business interests. No one really looking at that agreement or that deal or the mitigations, no one represented our neighborhood. There had been no meetings, there had been no announcements, no flyers, no communication whatsoever. Most of us had no idea they were going to appear until they were erected, and they've divided our community to this day. Even with an extension, even with the proponents going door to door on Sunday mornings, offering free food to renters in exchange for votes, telling people they must vote yes for speed bumps, they still did not reach the threshold of support. We've worked with them. We want to work with them, but these measures have surprised us all. We do not want them.
Thank you. Mark.
Good morning. I'm here this morning to ask you to vote no on the current motion in front of you. The survey referred to in the second half of this motion refers to a neighborhood protection plan, which is a contractual agreement for the Palazzo development, which specifically details the process and procedures for the traffic mitigation in our area. This contractual agreement was signed by the city, by the developer, and by the neighborhood. The first half of this motion refers to a development project at the southwest corner of Wilshire and Malcolm, which has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the contractual agreement for the Palazzo Westwood project. The Department of Transportation first told you at our last meeting here that this neighborhood protection plan was voluntary, and they avoided the word completely, using the word agreement. Now they say this is an understanding, still avoiding the word agreement. The last meeting, and only meeting with both sides at the table for the councilman's office, came up with 13 ideas to address the traffic mitigation in our neighborhood, including keeping in place all or majority of the current mitigations, which have shown, per DOT's guidelines, that there was a 72% response rate in the survey and a 72% approval in the affected area, and a net decrease of 14% in traffic in our neighborhood. I ask you today to vote no on this motion, as Councilman Weiss's office has not been straightforward to the neighborhood and has not laid out the true and correct facts about this neighborhood protection plan, which is a contractual agreement between the city, the developer, and the HOA. Not an understanding. This is an agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now ask Marilyn Stern and Prudence Faxon. Come up. After Marilyn and Prudence, we'll have Charlotte and Steve Zahn.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Stern, and I am on the board of the HOA, and I live on Glenmont Avenue, which is probably one of the
pull the microphone just a little bit closer to you. Thank you.
That was not going to be in the initial survey, but these mitigations, and I call them arrows, affect us. I'm going to read a letter that I wrote to Councilman Weiss. Why are my neighbors and I forced to drive on dangerous Hillgard Avenue to get to and from Westwood Village? Before the right and left turn arrow signs were installed, we were able to drive much more safely to and from Westwood Village and UCLA Hospital by crossing Hillgard on Weyburn and LeConte Avenues. We did not have to drive on a major artery with many buses, double-parked vehicles, and construction trucks. How many accidents or deaths have to happen before you will restore our traffic patterns? A week ago, January 12, 2009, there was an accident at the intersection of Manning and Malcolm Avenues, which is a blind intersection. My desire to make Westwood's residential streets safer dates back to 1995, when I witnessed an accident at the intersection of Malcolm and LeConte Avenues. As a result of my work, 4-way stop signs instead of 2-way were installed. And I have a letter to Patrick Tomchek dated 10/5/96. Traffic problems in Westwood have gotten worse over the past 14 years as a result of increased neighborhood traffic and the recent changes made at the intersections of LeConte, Weyburn, and Lynbrook Avenues. When will you make our streets safer and restore our access to the village? Does blood have to spill? Do you want blood on your hands? A lot of the issues were already discussed by other people. Going to and from UCLA in an emergency, our access needs to be direct. We do not need to be diverted. And children, they were concerned about were playing would get hurt. They need to consider when the children get older and start driving. My daughter just got her license. She's afraid to drive on these heavy traffic streets. It's much safer for her to drive directly.
If I could just ask you to conclude.
Okay. I'm a real estate agent. For those who have homes on busy traffic streets, I'm happy to represent them, sell their houses, and buy on less traffic streets. And as we know, contracts can be amended, and their issues are about a contract. Maybe they need to be changed, and we need to look at the big picture, the benefit of the entire neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Prudence McGowan Faxon. My family's lived, we have our house within the vulnerable core, and I'm here because I feel that the entire neighborhood has been unfairly disadvantaged by the actions of a few people who sought to put the mitigations on their street to help themselves. I am asking you today to please approve the funding for the removal of the temporary traffic mitigations so that we can get our neighborhood back together, because it's been torn apart. We're going on 15 months. It should have been a 6-month procedure. From our perspective, we have worked diligently with the deputies of our council office and with DOT over this entire time. Countless meetings up until this week when we met together. We feel that they've done a very fair job. They've gone out of their way. The prolonged period which they gave us all to try to sort through this, I strongly support their efforts. As you requested of us, we attended the meetings. And the second meeting was very contentious this week with a lot of hostility. The other side insists that they want all of the mitigations to remain. We want to vote. And when I go back to my homeowners and ask them what they want us to do, they say, well, we won. Why are we supposed to be giving up something? At this point in time, as Pauline has said, it seems to all of us that there is so much tension and friction in the neighborhood that the best alternative is to remove the mitigations and have a cooling off period and then get together and make a plan that is fair and equitable to everybody, all children, all streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte and Steve San. I just need one of you. I think Bill said he was going to either one of you to come back. The Westwood item. Hi, Steve. How are you? Long time no see.
Hello.
Go, Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Huggins. I live on West Holm Avenue, which is one of the streets that got diverted too. I came to this entire event very dispassionately and very objectively. I listened to both sides. I had the women who are very for the mitigations and the group that are against it. I listened to all of them because I really felt I should care. It's my neighborhood, but I'm a busy person. I'm an independent producer. I probably read in a given day 3 or 4 contracts every day, 365 days a year. I didn't even know about this contract. I've been a member of the Homeowners Association for the 6 years I've been there. I heard about some diversions. I heard about these things, but I didn't know the specifics of it. And I'm pretty savvy. You know, I have a master's degree. I'm not, and my husband's a PhD from UCLA. So we're fairly educated and we're fairly responsible. We have 2 children. 13 and 16, so we're very much aware of where kids play and where kids drive and how we move around. We both, at the end of the day, voted when the vote came out, the mitigations were up and the vote came out, we voted against them. We thought that in a democracy, the majority rules. That's the way I was taught. And my mom is a professor, and as a teacher, she believes that if you vote, then the vote wins. We weren't told the vote might matter. And in fact, the people who are now opposing the vote by citing contracts that none of us ever read, they're basically ignoring, in my opinion, the democracy. And they came to my house several times to try to win my vote over, and I listened to them. I listened open-mindedly to them. I would just say that this concept of backdoor politics and subjective criteria, they're using in a way against us, the people who have now lived with these things and would like them removed. And I looked up the word mitigation on my little iPhone here, and I will tell you that the word mitigation means something very different than what we're all experiencing. It means to cause or become less harsh or hostile. And that is exactly not what has happened in my neighborhood. So I urge you, please, to listen to the people.
Thank you. Steve.
Good morning, council members, Controller-elect Gruhl. My name is Steve Sand. I'm here on behalf of the business community from the village. My partners and I, we have 3 restaurants in Westwood Village, one of which is on one of the 3 affected streets, Lindbrook Drive. Most of the people in this room know me. I try to be, and our company try to be as supportive of the Westwood community in every way that we can, and we welcome the opportunity to work in partnership with the neighbors. These streets that are affected, LeConte, Weyburn, and Lindbrook, are shared streets. They're not owned by anybody. We, the commercial business owners and businesses in the village, we don't own those streets, and neither do the neighbors. They work in 2 directions. They go east-west. They bring traffic into the village, our customers, our guests, our patrons. They bring those patrons back to their homes in Holmby Westwood. These mitigations have been very harmful to the business community. That is not my opinion. That is the statement of the proponents of the mitigations. In their letter to you on the 22nd of April, they cited on page 9, they cited the objections. They said, one objection, that the current traffic measures make it inconvenient to go shopping. They don't deny that. They say there is some inconvenience. I would submit to you as a business owner, there's not some inconvenience, there is some considerable inconvenience. We hear this all the time from neighbors who are in Westwood, south of Wilshire, Westwood neighbors who are west of the UCLA campus behind Fraternity Row, that find it very difficult to try to figure out how to go loop-de-loop through the neighborhood to try to get to my business or to get to the Geffen Playhouse or get to the Ralphs. These streets serve all those businesses. And when there's discussion of a contract, I have to tell you as an attorney, no one spoke to the business community. These mitigations were imposed with no communication, no respect shown to us as neighbors. No one asked us, no one asked Tengu. We are about 50 feet to the west of the mitigation on Lindbrook. No one came to us and said, do we want the street blocked off? So I have to point out to you one other point. They put this in their document to you, and there's no dispute about this. The mitigation in question is to be mitigating one and one thing only, Kasdan project-related traffic. It says so right in their document. What they are mitigating and what they will privately admit that they're mitigating, and they say it in their letter to you, is that they have reduced cut-through traffic. They have reduced student, faculty, staff cut-through traffic from Wilshire Boulevard up to the campus. That is a misuse of this mitigation. So I would urge you to support the council office and support what I think is the majority of the residential community and absolutely the majority of the business community to remove these. Thank you.
Thank you both. Lisa, and maybe, I don't know, planning, DOT, planning. I don't know if you want to say anything, but I have a couple questions, so I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Well, just a couple of things, and you maybe answer this one, because I've looked at the contract, and I think I can honestly say with all of this that we had, until this came up 2 weeks ago, really no knowledge of any of these issues. It's really usually a district issue, and have tried to hear from both sides, and we definitely have heard from both sides on this item. The question I have is, which is in the document that has been put forward, is one, did the Holmby Westwood Property Owners Association take a vote? Was it a position of their board in what the mitigations would be?
I think that I appreciate the city attorney's office and the planning department being here at the table to answer questions as to talk about the legal effect of the plan amendment and the interpretation on the conditions, because I think that they are
That was my
prepared to
second
answer
question,
that.
but please.
But to just describe how we arrived at the temporary program in the first place, our office was presented with a series of petitions, which I have here, from the Homeowners Association Transportation Committee. And the Homeowners Association, their boundaries are very broad. I mean, they extend beyond the survey area, and they have presented a plan that they demonstrated, had a sufficient level of support, and the Department of Transportation, based on the preliminary survey, was advising that they felt comfortable to put in a temporary program. So that is how we arrived here. To talk about, I would like the Planning Department to talk about the legal effect.
Okay, just to first directly answer your question, it was the president of the Homeowners Association. And to my knowledge, no vote was taken among the HOA members when we worked on this agreement. To step back, this is not a contract, but we had a large project, that there was an environmental impact report prepared for. It found that there were no impacts to this, to local traffic in this local community. But nevertheless, it was requested from this community, and when the item went to council, a condition was added requiring a neighborhood traffic protection program. The first protection program was prepared, which I believe you have, is the Hirsch Green program, which basically amounts only to monitoring, which is not surprising, as there were no impacts identified. There was no way to come up with specific improvements. And then the project was constructed, and although the EIR had 115,000 square feet of retail, only 50,000 square feet was built. So the traffic generating part of the project got smaller. And we were approached by the community, the council office, to amend not the condition, but the neighborhood protection plan to put some improvements on a temporary basis forward immediately. And we do that through a clarification of the protection plan and how the condition will be complied with. It's not a contract. The department does not have the ability to unilaterally enter into a contract. So I just think that while it is an agreement, and it is our understanding that this agreement set forth the ability to get some improvements immediately rather than monitoring for 5 years and possibly or likely getting nothing. And then we relied upon DOT to evaluate the effectiveness of those measures.
Ms. City Attorney, do you want to comment on it's a contract agreement, what the...
Yes,
Sharon.
for the record, Sharon Seedorf Cardenas, City Attorney's Office. We've had an opportunity to look at this document, and in our view, it is not a contract. It hasn't gone through any of the proper procedures for it to be a contract that the city has entered into. You'll notice that one of the things that's missing, which I know you've seen on all the contracts, is that the city attorney is required to review the contracts and approve them as to form. There is no signature from the city attorney on this. This never went through our office. We were not involved in it. However, leaving that aside, what this is an interpretation of a condition that was entered into or was imposed as part of the approval on this project. And this condition is now in this document, they're setting forth how they're going to enforce the condition. And basically what DOT has done is consistent with how they've said they're going to implement this condition in this document. So even leaving aside the issue of the contract, which we are definite, this is not a contract. Still, DOT's actions are consistent with this
with the length
understanding that was had.
Because on 3, on number 3, it sets up the, I think before the geographic scope of the affected areas, but 4 expands that. Is that correct?
Right, and that's within DOT's authority to
With DOT.
determine what is the affected area. That's what this says.
Okay. And this was put in, just at least this was put in when? I mean, it was supposed to be reviewed after 6 months. How long has it?
I believe February 15th. So it's been
a year.
Yes,
a little over a year.
And just to add, when we began this, we did this with the belief that we had homeowner association and broad-based sufficient support to do this on a temporary basis. We had the goal of preserving the neighborhood and protecting the community. I mean, we had positive intentions. Never did we intend for the unintended consequence that some streets would benefit and other residential streets would experience increased traffic. We have had a series of meetings with the community, members from both sides throughout the entire year in trying to craft a consensus plan. Per the request of the committee, we had reached out to all the members of the stakeholders to see if we can craft a compromise. I know, we had 2 meetings. At the last meeting, we were very hopeful. I believe that there are passions on both sides. There's a fundamental disagreement, but the tone and the dialogue was actually improved, and there were a series of ideas generated, and those ideas that were generated, many of them were not diversionary. They're measures that could really work to calm traffic in the neighborhood, and we do believe, and we are very hopeful, that the consensus can be reached with proper outreach, with additional time. And it's unfortunate, but that we believe that the Department of Transportation's recommendation, for all the reasons they stated in their earlier presentation about creating a fair playing field, is the right way to proceed.
And then I'll let my colleagues ask questions. In the motion that was introduced by Councilmember Weiss, where it talks about Wilshire Malcolm, that's just the source of funds you're using. Is that correct? Those are
right. That was the source of funds to do the temporary program. The monies from the Kasdan properties remain intact, and we have communicated with the developer, and they will provide as much time as needed for the consensus plan to be crafted.
So the further move items in there is where you're taking the money from to remove them.
Yeah,
that's the source of funding.
That's right.
Okay.
Right. Chris Kuntz from City Planning. That was the only source of funding that we could come up with. And there are that's a fund from a separate development project, but there are unspent funds.
Funds to do. Okay, that was my question because it was brought up by one of the residents. Mr. Parks?
I just had one question for DOT, and I appreciate the city attorney's answer regarding the contract agreement or understanding, because that was unclear till you spoke. But I'd just like to ask DOT, what is it that we use to trigger a community process? I mean, because it seems like although we started off trying to help the community, something fell by the wayside as to a perception that DOT didn't follow its own rules. And is a community process triggered by the number of petitions or the severity of the change or the broadness of the area? What is it that we use to trigger the community process?
Many of our projects are triggered by the need to address neighborhood concerns in reaction to a new development project coming on board, and to the fact that conditions were passed and money set aside for preparing and implementing a neighborhood traffic management plan.
Okay, I understand that a project will trigger it, but what causes you to decide how much of an outreach you're going to do, what is the level of the vote, those types of things? And is it consistent project to project, or do we create a different platform as far as vote and percentages per project?
The typical process is to begin by meeting one of two ways. To first start out with an area-wide community meeting, or to start out with a committee, typically appointed with members appointed by with help from the council office or the neighborhood council, and that this committee would consist of members, hopefully representing a variety or most of the streets in the neighborhood. Then the role of the committee with these various representatives would be to help the city define what the problems are and to come up with a brainstorm of ideas and that DOT would evaluate. And then this committee would screen the most desirable and feasible ideas and bring these ideas back to the community in a community-wide forum, a meeting.
If that's typical, did we follow that on this case?
No, because we did not have such a community-wide meeting before the temporary measures were installed, nor did we have a committee with representatives from a variety of streets from within the neighborhood.
So the game plan as we move forward is to take a step back and start with the typical process?
Yes, that would be the best practice.
Mr. LaBonge.
I think that's a good game plan if you want to talk football analogy. I was going to use a river analogy. Anytime water runs everywhere, especially down the street, but once you block a street from water, then it impacts another street. It's a difficult community process. I think the planning deputy Tripoletti said it best in the sense unintended consequences came from a good concept. I know as a former deputy we would try to do this, but it was in a much smaller dimension. John Fisher, I'm thinking of the Mid-City Hospital out there on Orange and off Olympic Boulevard and some of the schools there. Mr. Yaroslavsky, when he was a councilman, did the building at Wilshire and Fairfax on the west side that they blocked street access before that had it. But when you deal with the commercial district, I think the one important thing from a business standpoint, I think sometimes it has a challenge on that. And the most important thing is not going to solve your problem today or tomorrow, but the future and the long-term commitment to get people out of cars walking in such a way there. And also certain streets, and I say this, big traffic on big streets. I know you have no big streets on either side of Westwood. Hillgard is the only street that has any reminiscence of a kind of a street, I believe, that could carry traffic. I know Mr. Parks and I both went to City College, where UCLA once was.
I lived on Hillgard.
And UCLA was at Vermont, and they moved out to Westwood to get away from the city, if I remember from my history here. That all being said, I think if you can, how rapidly can we respond, Pauline? Because I have great respect for you as a traffic planner and community mitigation. If this, take a time out, regroup, refocus, see what modifications may need to be made to this, and I do appreciate the city attorney's comments on that. How much time are we looking at this?
Well, at the last meeting, there was a list of ideas that were brought forward from brainstorming. So we're ready to investigate the feasibility of all of these measures. So we're ready to work. I think we want to work with the council office and with community representatives on both sides to see, how soon they can be available. How soon can they feel that they've been healed enough so that they can sit down on a friendly basis.
And your department has the opportunity, the funding to at least go forward?
Yes.
At this point here, we're not just going to stop and make it dust.
How much is in the neighborhood protection plan?
How much? The Kasson developer pledged at least $60,000 with another $20,000 potentially more to add to it for a total of $80,000
in the area.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mr. Parks? So I think that, and again, this has not been an easy issue, I think, for the council office or any of us that have gotten the calls, or the community particularly, to do that. And I think we do want to have traffic mitigation measures, but want to be able to say that we have worked together to do that. But I think, as Mr. LaBonge mentioned and others, and my earlier question, which was not how quickly necessarily, but how can you do a good process at the same time ensure that there's an end result at some point in time to do that. So I think that what you were saying, Mr. Labange to move the motion that is before us to have the funding available and to remove the temporary, to come back with more permanent. Okay? Okay.
And I suggest too, they make some temporary modifications, because I've done this before, where you actually barricade a street to show that it's closed before in a least costly matter as opposed to an extensive cost, and walk through it as much as you can, as you've done in other areas. Pauline, you're very skillful. Thank you.
All right, that'll be the order, and it'll go forward to the council. Do you know what date it goes to council, or we haven't scheduled a date? We'll make sure everyone knows the date of that. Okay. Thank you. We have item number 6.
Item number 6 is the CAO report relative to the 2008-9 Transportation Grant Fund Annual Work Program.
Good morning, Angela Berman, CAO. The report recommends the actions necessary to continue the ongoing Transportation Grant Fund Annual Work Program projects, including the transfer of budgeted funds to department salary accounts as well as specific projects.
That was quick. Do you have anything else to add to that? Okay. Why? Can I just ask, why does this come at the end of the fiscal year?
It probably shouldn't. The department received requests from the various departments, excuse me, for the front and matching funds that will be required for this fiscal year, earlier this fiscal year, or they received the request earlier. However, the requests were in excess of funds available, so the department has been working with the various departments to negotiate how much is really going to be necessary to expend this fiscal year. So,
and I know last year the total project funding was $277 million, and this year it's 101. Why is it so much less?
The $200 million figure includes the Metro grant funding amount. What we've budgeted for in 08-09 was $29.2 million, and that's what we recommended to be funded, transferred for front funding and match funds. So the value of the projects in 07-08 was less than the value of the projects that are going forward in 08-09. However, we're still expending in Prop C about the same amount of money.
Okay. And then are there any projects expected to need additional Prop C?
Not for this fiscal year, no.
Not for this fiscal year, okay. Mr. Parks or Mr. LeBon,
I move.
any questions?
No, I'm all right.
Good? Okay, so we'll approve the CAO recommendations.
I'm going to run back to committee.
Yes, the first one's here. Yes. Yes. So that'll be the order. And Mr. Labange, now you hear item 1 through 4 as well. Mr. Labange votes aye on those.
For an invitation.
Yes, he votes aye
Yeah,
on 1 through
thank you.
4.
1 through 4. Good.
Thank you very much.
I'm going
Sorry,
back to
thank
the
you.
committee.
Yes.
We had the marathon. Oh, yeah. I sinned.
And we adjourn the.
I'm going to get it from the priest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meeting is adjourned.
We're going to work it out.
Have they met with the organizers and the owners and the priests? Have they all gotten together?
They're tomorrow.
Tomorrow.